Supreme Court of Appeal President Justice Mandisa will take the stand today when the Judicial Service Commission continues with the second day of interviews in search for a new Chief Justice of South Africa. Maya will be the second candidate to be interviewed. Constitutional Court Justice Mbuyiseli Madlanga was the first nominee who took the stand yesterday. Now, the process has been criticised by some, with groups like Freedom Under Law questioning the suitability of some of the people conducting the interviews. Former Constitutional Court Judge and Chairperson of Freedom Under Law, Justice Johann Kriegler, joins us now to talk about the process, how things went yesterday, and of course what is happening on the second day today. Justice Kriegler, thank you very, very much for joining us. It's wonderful to have you on the programme.
You're very welcome. I like being on the programme.
Excellent, thank you. So let's begin very quickly with just a look into yesterday and the first interview that we saw by a Constitutional Court Justice Mbuyiseli Madlanga. How did you think he performed? What did you think of the process?
I know the man. I like the man. I thought he did well, but obviously it's not a show business beauty contest. The interviews are much more fundamental than that. I think he put across his vision for the future, and I think the members of the JSC know precisely what they have in Mbuyiseli Madlanga.
Yeah. I mean, and a very long day it was, and certainly bringing some very interesting observations to the table. And many have said seem to have held his own and came through very, very well. So that's day number one, but we've got a long way to go. But I want to know your observations of the process so far, because there has been criticism as to, firstly, the delays, and secondly, the resubmission of information that was already submitted, and even the interview panel. So I just want to get your ideas of this whole selection process so far.
Leanne, the process is predetermined by the Constitution. It has to go in a certain procedural line. It's been too slow. Everybody knows that. I'm not revealing any secrets.
Yeah.
We've been without a Chief Justice officially now for some 3 months or more. We have been without a Chief Justice effectively for some 6 months or more, and that's undesirable. The process should have been commenced earlier. It should have been pushed more quickly, but it is on the go now. It is in everybody's interest to see what is happening. The transparency is to be commended. It is a marked change from what we used to have here in the past and what still applies in many other countries. The citizens, the people can see who is the candidate, who are the candidates, and they can judge the process for themselves. That's democracy in action.
It certainly is, and I don't think we can emphasize enough how important these interviews are and how important our Chief Justice is, because when you look at the judiciary here in South Africa, when you look at everything that falls under the judiciary, this has to be something that is sacred. I mean, we've got to be very, very careful, and I'm not sure if people understand the importance on this. Perhaps we can revisit that when we look at the duties of a Chief Justice. And, we do not want a vacant seat there. We don't. Obviously, we have an acting Chief Justice at the moment, but, not an ideal situation. But I suppose that's why we do have an acting Chief Justice if something does go wrong with the incumbent. However, this is an important one. Let's talk to the actual importance of this position.
Leanne, first of all, one must remember that our Constitution creates what is called a separation of powers. State power is divided between 3 components of the state. That is to the advantage of all of us, because it prevents anyone running away and creating a dictatorship. The executive, that is the president, and the government service are the one branch or the one pillar of the state. The legislature, Parliament and the provincial legislatures are the second pillar, and then thirdly, the judiciary. The judiciary has no staff, it has no army, it has no purse. It is the disciplinary supervisor of the state administration. It is there to see that the executive and the legislature behave themselves as they should in terms of the Constitution. And we've seen exactly how that worked. When the former president was under suspicion and under criticism for the way he handled the finances of his own homestead, Parliament did nothing about it. The government service did nothing about it. It was the judiciary, finally, that had to call to account everybody because of what was going on at Nkandla. That shows how it works. The judiciary, of course, as I've said, has no real physical power. It doesn't have a police force or an army. It doesn't have money, but it does have and has to have integrity. It has to be the believable, honest broker in the power game of our country.
Yeah.
If you lose confidence in the integrity of the judiciary, democracy itself is in jeopardy. We have been criticized. The judiciary has been recently criticized even more severely by a senior cabinet minister. It is all the more important that the judiciary be manifest in its integrity, in its opposition to power, in its objectivity, in its functional integrity and honesty, its competence, its transparent, sticking to the job that the Constitution has entrusted to it.
I mean, this is a question I know that was posed yesterday to Judge Mbuyiseli Madlanga about the media and about, well, not the media, but the criticism that's been levelled about the judiciary. But in your view, what do you believe is an attack on the judiciary?
Leanne, to put it at its simplest, a game of soccer, a game of rugby, a tennis match cannot be played unless the referee or the umpire is trusted, the decisions are accepted. In the democracy game, it is absolutely vital that the decisions of the judiciary be accepted as the rule. Mandisa himself laid that down very shortly after the news South Africa had dawned, when we in the Constitutional Court set aside a proclamation that he had issued, and he went on television at 11 o'clock that same morning to say he doesn't like what the Constitutional Court has done, but he and his government accept it without any hesitation, because what the CC says is the law, and he and his government will live that way. We've drifted away from that a dangerous distance. It's time that we got back to that state of affairs.
Judge Kriegler, I just want to bring in one of the concerns that you have, Justice Kriegler, you've raised some concerns about the inclusion of members of the JSC, Julius Malema and Dali Mpofu. Why those two? Why do you have an issue with these members?
Leanne, once again, I must answer it a little bit more broadly. The JSC is the quality control body of the judiciary. Its own integrity has got to be established. It has to be clear to all. We have two members of that body who are under a cloud regarding their own integrity. In the case of Mr. Malema, a parliamentary ethics committee has found him guilty of having abused his position on the JSE to further a private interest and not the public interest, which is a serious breach of his duty as a member of the JSC. That is still hanging. In the case of Mr. Mpofu, he has been found guilty by a panel of the Judicial Service Council of having acted in the proceedings before the Zombo Commission in a manner unfitting an advocate. He is a very senior advocate. He's a very vocal and important member of the JSC. For him to have such a finding hanging over his head, yet nevertheless participating in the quality control functions of the JSC, we say is undesirable. We were faced with a very difficult decision. Do we try to stop it, which would mean that the process for the identification of the Chief Justice would be delayed yet again, heaven knows how long? We decided no, we dare not do that. But we could not keep quiet about this concern that two men whose own conduct is under a cloud are participating in this vitally important constitutional function.
Yeah.
That's where we stand.
That's where you stand. So I suppose the follow-up question needs to be why target individuals instead of actually questioning the whole process of being on the JSC in its entirety? The process is prescribed in the Constitution. We thought at the time when we were sitting as a court to judge the quality of the new Constitution that the majority of politicians on the JSC was possibly a problem, but it wasn't so much of a problem that we could say the JSC as now composed is not a proper body to serve. It is undesirable that the politicians on the JSC seem to be there as politicians, or some of them see themselves there as politicians, as promoting political interests. That is not why they are there. They are there to serve your and my interests, the interests of all of us, by acting apolitically, acting as delegates, as appointees of the public to ensure that the judges who are nominated and promoted and disciplined are dealt with fairly, honestly, and in terms of the Constitution. Okay. At times the JSC has faltered in that respect. Okay. We have, in Freedom Under Law, addressed them about it privately, publicly, and sometimes even in the courts. But the JSC is the body that we've got. If the men and women on that body do their duty in terms of the Constitution, it should work. It is when they do not carry out their functions honestly and sincerely in terms of the spirit and the letter of the Constitution that they falter. Justice, thank you very much for talking to us here on the program. Former Constitutional Court Judge and Chairperson of Freedom Under Law, Justice Johann Kriegler. All right. In fact, let's go now to those interviews. And we've got a crossing now to Hasina, who is covering that story for us for more on the second day of the interviews. So let's go over to her. Hasina Gore, good morning to you.
Good morning, Eliane. Yes, as you mentioned, day 2 of the Chief Justice interviews are about to go underway in a few moments here. The commissioners have begun streaming in this morning, and it's quite an interesting day, actually a historic day as well, because this is the first time in the country that a female candidate is being interviewed for this position of Chief Justice. The Supreme Court President, Mandisa will be in the hot seat today, being vetted by the 22 commissioners, really being asked on her judicial as well as administrative and leadership qualities. She's quite a pioneer in her field, a first, a woman of many, many firsts. She's been the first female judge in Eastern Cape all those years ago, and then going into the colored courts in various positions, being the first sometimes black woman as well. And it's quite an interesting day. She's not just a female judge and, being seen for equality or transformation. Her CV itself and her qualities speak for themselves, irrespective of her gender or race. So it's going to be quite an interesting day. Some of the issues she might face challenges on is her lack of experience on the Concord bench. She's acted, but she hasn't been a constitutional court judge. That might be something that might come, against her at this time. So it's going to be quite an interesting morning. Yesterday we had the first candidate who was interviewed. Quite a grueling day, almost 8 hours of questioning. That was Constitutional Court Justice Madlanga. He was really, really grilled on his leadership qualities and judicial expertise. The question was posed to him as well of whether or not he felt the country was ready for a female Chief Justice. He couldn't answer that completely straight, but he's been quite vocal on his work in female empowerment, as well as allowing for and making allowances for LGBTQ and other groups in his works. So quite an interesting day up ahead of us. We have heard those some criticism coming through, like the ones from the judge that you just spoke to from Freedom Under Law, saying that some of the commissioners should not be on that panel. But we're going to be discussing that more just later on agenda when we speak with Judges Matter, Alison Tilly in a little bit, as well as the proceedings which are about to begin at 9 o'clock. For those that do want to follow, it is on all the SABC platforms as well as on our live stream. So people will be able to follow these proceedings as it happens throughout the day, Leanne.
Asina, thanks very much for that, and looking forward to this one. This is going to be a very important interview as well. So 9 o'clock, that's when it'll all begin.
Indeed, don't go anywhere, because Hasina Kori will, of course, be looking up and leading into the next interview with Justice Maya. So she's going to have a few interviews. Just give us a sense, background of who we are talking about, the woman that's going to take the stand today. And, of course, all of that happening here on SABC News.